They have just unleashed a sudden storm of missiles, turning the quiet night sky into a blazing canvas of streaking fire. This is how one panicked resident from southern Israel described the chaos that erupted mere hours after President Donald Trump declared a complete ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Imagine the confusion, emergency sirens wailing in the darkness, families scrambling for shelter, and a newfound sense of dread gripping the nation. What in the world is going on, and how did it escalate so quickly? Today we are diving deep into this dramatic conflict, exposing the dizzying diplomatic maneuvers, the looming nuclear fears, and the political chess moves that all led to one of the most intense standoffs the Middle East has seen in recent memory. In this episode, we will tackle the big questions. How did a 12-day war catch the entire region off guard? Who or what triggered this sudden wave of missiles that shattered the fragile calm? And what is the scheme behind President Trump's declared ceasefire, a deal supposedly brokered in a late-night phone call with Israel's leadership? We will also peel back the curtain on why Tehran seems so determined to keep its nuclear ambitions cloaked from international scrutiny, how Israel's own secretive nuclear capabilities factor into the tension, and whether the world is on the brink of a far-reaching conflict with devastating consequences. Finally, we will examine the shifting positions of global powers, from the United States to Qatar and beyond, and find out if there is any genuine hope of lasting peace. Let's travel back just a few days to set the scene. For nearly 2 weeks, Israeli forces have been striking targets inside Iran. Word spread that the Israeli military had joined forces with the United States to weaken Tehran's nuclear facilities, dropping so-called bunker buster bombs on key underground sites. Meanwhile, Iranian officials insisted from the start that they have no nuclear weapons program at all, underscoring that if they ever wanted to build one, no world leader could stop them. Yet the rumblings of war persisted, and in the blink of an eye, the Middle East once again found itself teetering on the edge of chaos. At the heart of these events is Israel's unconfirmed, but widely suspected, nuclear arsenal. Just imagine a region where Israel, which never denies nor confirms its nuclear capabilities, wages a campaign against what it perceives as a gathering threat from Iran. Then add decades of bitterness, proxy battles, and relentless verbal sparring, and you have a stark portrait of how precariously balanced everything is. Diplomatic tensions have soared, fueled by deeply rooted suspicion and a race to see which side can seize the final advantage. For 12 days, that tension morphed into open conflict. We begin with day one of the so-called 12-day war. Iranian media outlets had scattered reports of unusual air activity near some of their scientific compounds. Then, in a jarring announcement, Tehran officials accused Israel of literally dropping bombs on a covert nuclear facility located deep underground. Footage circulated online, allegedly showing enormous craters near key Iranian infrastructure. Warnings from Iranian generals quickly followed. Any further act of aggression, they declared, would be met with the fiercest response imaginable. Soon after, Israeli sources responded, "We simply cannot allow Iran to move forward with its illegal ambitions," sending shockwaves across the diplomatic sphere. For nearly 2 weeks, the conflict surged. Iranian officials claimed to have fired waves of missiles at Israeli targets, including advanced weapons that roared across the night sky, rattling nerves in cities like Tel Aviv and Beersheba. The Israeli side confirmed repeated missile attacks, insisting that their Iron Dome systems had worked overtime to intercept as many incoming rockets as possible. Even so, the human toll, particularly in Beersheba, was grim. 4 lives lost in a sudden, gut-wrenching blow. Families cried out in disbelief, plagued by sorrow and burdened with questions about how the conflict had spiraled into such violence, especially given the feverish talk of a ceasefire rumored to be in the works. That rumored ceasefire was no small matter. President Donald Trump claimed he had spoken by phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and secured, at last, a total end to the fighting. On the assumption that everything works as it should, which it will, the president declared on his personal social media site, "I would like to congratulate both countries on having the stamina, courage, and intelligence to end what should be called the 12-day war." There was a dramatic sense of finality in the statement, as though the world were, at long last, about to see a respite from a conflict that felt on the brink of spinning out of control. In fact, Trump's exuberance was so strong that even the more cautious voices at the White House seemed momentarily hopeful. But was it all too good to be true? Almost as soon as the president's words were posted, terror returned in the form of explosions that rocked Beersheba, leaving 4 people dead. As dawn approached, desperation flared, and analysts the world over wondered, had the ceasefire fallen apart before it ever truly began? Or was it simply that certain prearranged operations were still in motion, as some Israeli officials cryptically hinted, which might cause a brief continuation of hostilities before the guns finally fell silent? One thing was certain: the Middle East had endured decades of dashed hopes and unexpected twists. Would this be any different? Iran, for its part, initially confirmed that an agreement had been reached, but with conditions. Iran's foreign minister insisted that if Israel did not stop its so-called illegal aggression against the Iranian people by 4 in the morning Tehran time, 1:30 in the morning Irish time, there would be no cessation of hostilities. Tensions soared as the deadline drew near. Imagine the countdown clock, moment by moment, the world waiting breathlessly to see whether Israel might hold back further strikes on Iranian soil. At around the appointed hour, local sources indicated that Israeli planes had temporarily suspended their bombing missions. Correspondingly, Iran halted its immediate retaliations. Yet a sense of unease lingered. Abbas Araghchi, one of Iran's top officials, told his followers that the final decision on stopping the military operations would come later, and that everything hinged on whether Israel fully stood down. Meanwhile, the Israeli leadership, from what we can glean, had seemingly decided to keep quiet. Prime Minister Netanyahu urged his ministers not to comment publicly, fueling suspicions that an intricate behind-the-scenes drama was still unfolding. It gave the impression of a global poker game, each side trying to hide its hand, each side refusing to blink first. At times like these, you can practically hear the question on everyone's lips: does a real ceasefire stand even the slightest chance? After all, the tension between Iran and Israel is decades old, and the track record for lasting peace is littered with broken promises, a hushed but ever-present nuclear threat, and indignant rhetoric from both capitals. What if this was just another lull in a conflict with no real end in sight? To unravel that question properly, we must look at some key players behind the scenes. While President Trump is heralded as the official broker of the deal, we know that others helped shape the negotiations. The White House disclosed that Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and an American special envoy named Steve Witkoff all engaged in direct or indirect contact with Iranian officials. Meanwhile, Qatar's Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, reportedly took on a vital role in coaxing Iranian authorities to the bargaining table. Picture a flurry of cell phone calls, diplomatic cables, and hush-hush conversations that wound through the small hours of the night, culminating in a carefully choreographed statement to the global press. What makes this entire dance with diplomacy even more complicated is how the United States has played a major military role. Days ago, American bombers participated in a series of raids on Iran's subterranean facilities, specifically targeting nuclear infrastructure that experts in Washington believed was nearing a point of no return. That phrase, presumably referencing an Iranian nuclear breakout, has circulated widely among intelligence circles, stoking serious anxieties about a proliferation cascade, the chance that other Middle Eastern states might scramble to obtain nuclear weapons in response, and the risk of a catastrophic showdown between regional rivals. If you are feeling that swirl of tension yourself, you are not alone. That swirl also enveloped the international markets late into the night. Traders on Wall Street, in Tokyo, and throughout Europe anxiously monitored the developments. When word first broke that a ceasefire might be on the horizon, S&P 500 futures jumped by 0.4%, an early signal that a diplomatic resolution, no matter how tenuous, can put investors at ease. Oil markets, however, have been especially skittish. In the current environment, we saw United States crude futures fall to lower levels than the previous week. The reason is straightforward. When there is fear of a full-blown Middle East conflict, oil supply routes could easily be disrupted. Conversely, when steps toward peace appear, even if only briefly, markets calm. All of this begs a crucial question. Just how permanent can a ceasefire be when you have two old foes, one already suspected to have nuclear arms, the other rumored to be racing toward them, locked in what feels like an existential standoff? Israel has always asserted that it must maintain a strong defensive and potentially offensive stance to ensure its survival in a region it considers hostile. Iran has hammered home the viewpoint that it is merely pursuing its own energy and security interests, and that the Israeli nuclear posture is a direct existential threat in return. Truth be told, the conflict in question has overshadowed daily life for countless ordinary people, not just in Israel and Iran, but also among the far-flung diaspora communities around the globe. As we speak, families with relatives in Tehran or Tel Aviv are sending frantic messages, hoping everyone is safe, while soldiers in both nations brace for another possible round of attacks. There is no single perspective that can capture the complexity of these tensions, but the actual human toll, from Tehran's crowded streets to the bustle of Israeli cities, is enormous. And speaking of real people, let us remember that Israel struck places like Evin Prison, a grim facility known for holding political prisoners. Think about that for a moment. The fact that these sites, brimming with complex moral implications, were included as targets underscores how broad the mission might be. Some Israeli spokespeople implied that Iran's leadership itself was in the crosshairs, that the bombing of Evin Prison was meant to jolt the regime, not just impair nuclear ambitions. Here is our first call to action. If you find these revelations compelling or even alarming, and you want to support our deep dives into critical global issues, consider giving this video a thumbs up. Your engagement truly helps us continue exposing the intricate layers of stories like these, especially when they slip under the radar of daily headlines. But let us keep going. How exactly did these hostilities start? Many blame the gradual collapse of international diplomatic efforts between American and Iranian officials in recent years, which left a vacuum quickly filled by mistrust. Israel, for its part, has historically sounded the alarm whenever Iran's nuclear program advances in ways that appear suspiciously military in nature. Even now, though Iranian leaders repeatedly insist on the peaceful intent of their research, the road to verification is fraught. Meanwhile, Tehran claims Israel's refusal to accede to global nuclear treaty obligations effectively sets a double standard. The 12-day war that President Trump so dramatically referenced is perhaps the single most jarring chapter in recent history, a short but intense burst of violence that could have escalated beyond all control. By day 3 or 4, American intelligence sources declared that Iranian ballistic missiles were on the move, and satellite imagery indicated spikes in activity around key Iranian launch sites. Israeli analysts braced for a barrage, urging citizens to stay vigilant. The actual rocket attacks soon followed, with sirens reverberating across major Israeli population centers. On the Iranian side, officials broadcast triumphant messages, promising that no foreign boots would ever again trample Iranian soil. Back and forth, back and forth. We saw an American airbase apparently targeted by Iranian missiles. President Trump downplayed the significance, calling it a very weak response and praising the minimal damage. Tehran, however, insisted that it was a warning shot, demonstrating the extent to which their ballistic capabilities could scale up if provoked. Intriguingly, both sides seemed to hold back from unleashing their full military might, reflecting an unspoken awareness that a total war was not in anyone's best interest. Then came an unexpected turning point, when the United States ramped up its involvement by dropping specialized bombs on Iranian bunkers. It signaled a major escalation. Iran's leadership presumably recognized that letting tensions climb further might invite crippling devastation. At some juncture, cooler heads began trying to pull each side away from the brink. Enter frantic backdoor negotiations, with Qatar possibly taking a prominent role, bridging communications between Tehran and Washington, and with the White House urging Netanyahu's cabinet to keep open lines of discussion. During that moment, the possibility of a ceasefire started lining the horizon. One pressing concern was the fate of tens of thousands of civilians in Tehran. With bombs falling, the capital's day-to-day life had crumbled into chaos, sending countless families fleeing in search of safety. People grabbed personal belongings, loaded up cars, and departed the city. Such images evoked memories of older conflicts in the region, a dismal reminder of how fragile prosperity can be when the drums of war begin pounding. Even in the face of official denials, Iranian state broadcasts could no longer hide the devastation. All the while, rumors were swirling that Israeli leaders were also looking for an off-ramp. Exerting maximum pressure on Iran might secure short-term military gains, but it would likely carry a hefty political price, both on the world stage and within Israel itself. Once daily life in major Israeli cities started being disrupted by missile alerts, public concern mounted sharply, fueling calls for a strategy that might curb the violence. That is exactly where the White House stepped in. President Trump publicized that in a single late-night phone call, he hammered out a ceasefire arrangement with Benjamin Netanyahu. He added that the plan would hold only if Tehran halted its retaliatory measures. At first, Tehran seemed reluctant, but eventually officials like Abbas Araghchi cautiously signaled agreement, though they insisted that if Israel continued aggression in any form, Iran would respond proportionally. By the time official confirmation of the ceasefire trickled out, the world was exhausted. Investors, politicians, everyday citizens, and especially the civilians stuck in the conflict zone. But mere hours into the fresh arrangement, a volley of missiles erupted near Beersheba, marking one of the most chilling turning points yet. The question was this new wave of violence an attempt by hardliners to sabotage the peace deal, or a final pre-ceasefire mission that could not be aborted in time? Some speculation contends that factions within the Iranian military or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps might have taken a separate stance from the rest of the government, aiming to ensure their show of force did not get overlooked. Israel, on the other hand, pointed to possible communication breakdowns or the unstoppable momentum of previously ordered strikes. Only history, and likely more declassified intelligence, will reveal the truth. But in the immediate hours following that flash of violence, the ceasefire grew even more fragile. Strangely, though, there was an eerie lull afterwards. For nearly several hours straight, no new missile salvos came to light, and no additional bombings were confirmed on Iranian territory. Diplomatic chatter ramped up a notch, and by morning, the major news outlets were abuzz with speculation that the two countries might indeed step back from further open warfare. Meanwhile, the White House expressed guarded optimism, while American officials with knowledge of the negotiations hammered home that everything now depended on Iran's willingness to honor the deal and on Israel's restraint. Now, if you are enjoying this deep dive into the hidden layers of the conflict, here is our second short but friendly call to action. Please subscribe to the channel so you will not miss future episodes where we continue analyzing and unpacking the critical developments flowing from this ceasefire. We promise to offer clarity and nuance amid the swirling headlines. Returning to the day's events, relief was not universally felt. Many Israeli families who lost loved ones in the overnight missile strikes struggled to process their grief. They wanted answers, understandably outraged that such a tragedy occurred mere hours after hearing hopeful news of peace. Similar heartbreak was mirrored across Iranian communities dealing with the aftershocks of clandestine bombing runs on their soil. It was a gut-wrenching scenario. On both sides, parents, siblings, and children confronted the abrupt and senseless nature of war. Meanwhile, markets reacted with cautious optimism. By early morning, the S&P 500 seemed poised to open higher, while oil prices showed signs of stabilizing. Across the globe, people exhaled with cautious relief that the region might not be hurtling toward an all-out conflagration after all. Yet the puzzle remains. Has the fundamental hostility been genuinely soothed, or is this respite just another pause before hostilities resume? To get to the heart of the matter, we need to talk about the nuclear question. For years, Israel has believed that Iran is merely months away from producing a viable nuclear weapon. America's intelligence community, however, seems more divided. Some agencies have insisted that Iran halted its active pursuit of a nuclear warhead years ago, but the White House under President Trump and other senior figures have asserted that Iranian leaders never truly abandoned the effort. Hence, the bunker-buster bombing missions on Iranian facilities. Tehran's leaders, from the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei on down, ironically claim they never wanted a bomb in the first place, but add that if they did, no external force would stop them. How can these two narratives coexist? That is the fundamental conundrum fueling this crisis. Yes, the ceasefire might bring welcome calm, but it does not magically resolve the deeper mistrust. Israel continues to argue that the Non-Proliferation Treaty does little to curtail what it perceives as Iran's unstoppable nuclear quest. Meanwhile, Tehran condemns Israel for refusing to sign the treaty at all, painting its neighbor as a clandestine nuclear power that demands compliance from everyone else while hiding behind ambiguity. One cannot help but wonder if, without a more comprehensive agreement or mutual inspections, these tensions will simply flare up again and again. And so, we find ourselves at this perplexing juncture. Multiple waves of missiles have struck just hours after a global superpower announced mission accomplished in negotiating a ceasefire. The cost in lives, the barrage of terrifying nights, and the near-crippling sense of dread that has lingered in these societies underscores how precarious the situation is. Political leaders have not declared final victory. Instead, they speak in coded language about recommendations to stand down, conditional halts, and final decisions that remain pending. The entire world is holding its breath. One might imagine that these developments lead us to a simpler conclusion. Are we looking at the end of fighting? The short answer is we do not know. Peace, in the Middle East or anywhere else, is seldom guaranteed by a single phone call or a single handshake. The interplay of national pride, survival instincts, and perceived existential threats runs far too deep. Indeed, the years of hostility between Israel and Iran, the overlapping interests of world powers, and the repeated choke points in negotiation all add layers of unpredictability to the future. And yet, if there is one flicker of hope, it is the fact that for the moment, both sides seem to be taking stock of the costs. After all, the vantage from Tehran, looking upon battered infrastructure, or from Beersheba, mourning four souls who woke up expecting a normal day, is a sobering reminder of how swiftly tension can spiral into heartbreak. Both the Israeli and Iranian publics surely recognize what further escalation might bring. If the ceasefire can hold a bit longer, perhaps the crisis mode will subside enough for cooler heads to begin a more thorough negotiation. Benjamin Netanyahu has, according to insiders, instructed his ministers to avoid any careless statements that might rattle Tehran's sense of security. Senior Iranian officials, likewise, have noticeably tempered their fiery rhetoric. Does this mean both sides are inching toward a fragile path of coexistence, or is it merely a calculated pause to reload their strategic arsenals? That is the ultimate question hanging in the air. Looking ahead, there remains the question of the nuclear standoff. If Tehran genuinely pursues nuclear technology to generate energy or for national pride, is there a diplomatic path that allows for oversight, transparency, and trust building? Could the United States, with or without President Trump, step back into the role of mediator? And is there a chance the global community might unite around a new set of guidelines or an updated agreement? Alternatively, will the hawks in Washington, Tel Aviv, and Tehran push so hard that the next surge of conflict proves far deadlier than the last? Certainly, the near future will be telling. Perhaps hours from now, we will hear new announcements, confirmation that the ceasefire is to be extended, or chilling news that negotiations broke down yet again. The uncertainty is palpable. The only thing we know for certain is that the drama is far from over. Still, by shining a spotlight on the complexities behind the scenes, the hidden phone calls, the secret militias, the economic ripple effects, and the heavy toll on ordinary families, we can glean a clearer picture of how layered and dangerous these international entanglements truly are. Stay tuned, because we will be monitoring each new development, each official statement, and each subtle shift in the region's power balance. If the 12-day war does indeed come to a close, future generations may remember it as the near catastrophe that finally forced the world to address the deeper tensions underlying Iran's nuclear ambitions and Israel's stance in the region. Or perhaps it will be just another footnote in an ongoing saga of suspicion and strife. Either way, as bombs fall silent and missiles remain in their silos, we will be here to guide you through every crucial twist and turn, determined to uncover the truth behind the headlines.